One. 1, 2. Yo, the sun don't shine forever, but as long as it's here, then we might as well shine together. Better now than never. Business before pleasure.
Hey, what's going on? It's your boy BT, and I came here to talk some boxing with the thousands of True School Sports subscribers. What's going on, guys? Now, this is something new I'm going to be doing on the channel, so this will be periodically. I'll be doing this. I watch a lot of, I watch boxing. I like to watch old fights on my own personal time, but what I wanted to do is, when I watch older fights, I want to kind of like, when I do these post-fight reviews for the fights that go on today, I want to do somewhat of the same thing for the older fights, from the 80s, 70s, the 90s, the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, whenever the fight took place. And I wanted to break them down and just really dissect them. So I'm going to be doing this on the channel. You're going to be seeing me talking about older fights from probably before I was even born, because we do have access to a lot of fights on YouTube. So whatever is on YouTube and I can watch, I'll be definitely doing videos on them. So if you guys have any fights you want me to watch and take notes on and break down in this kind of form, if you like this video I'm about to do, just leave in the comments down below. But the first fight, classical fight review that I'm going to do is going to be probably the definitive fight as far as Mexico versus Puerto Rico in boxing, the biggest rivalry in boxing. This fight right here is the definitive classic, the definitive, in the eyes of many, best fight of that whole series, that whole rivalry, and that is the 1981 bout with Salvador Sanchez versus Wilfredo Gomez. Now, these are two all-time great fighters. This was the Battle of the Little Giants. The year was 1981. The world was so much different. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the internet. Cool in the Gang's Celebration was near the top of the charts, and Donkey Kong had just came out at the arcade for the first time. So 1981 was a very, very different time for the world in America, and it was a great time for boxing, particularly for these two little giants. So I'm going to set the stage of what took place before this fight and why this fight was so big. So we'll start with Wilfredo Gomez. Wilfredo Gomez at the time, was one of the hardest punchers pound for pound in boxing. You could argue he might have been the hardest puncher pound for pound in boxing at that particular time. Now, building up to his fight with Salvador Sanchez, he scored a 5th round TKO over Derek Holmes in August of 1980. Now, Derek Holmes was a guy who KO'd Gomez in the amateurs. He knocked out Wilfredo Gomez in the amateurs. So, yes, the amateur ranks and the pro ranks are different, but that, to me, was a huge win for Gomez in what was a magical run, I believe, when he was fighting at 122. That was big for his confidence going into that fight with Salvador Sanchez. Now, following the Derek Holmes fight, or before the Derek Holmes fight, I should say, the biggest win of his career to that point, he had fought Carlos Zarate, a really good Mexican fighter at that particular time. He was probably the best Mexican boxer since Ruben Olivares, who, as most of you might know, Ruben Olivares, he's most famous for fighting Alexis Arguello, who in those weight classes is a freaking legend in boxing, period. Zarate at the time, was definitely a tough fighter, definitely someone that was great to have on your resume. So by the time these two guys fought each other in 1981, their combined record, it was ridiculous. Their combined record, they were just, Sanchez and Gomez, their combined record was 73 wins, 0 losses, 1 draw, with 72 KOs. That's impressive, and it really goes to show you the kind of level these guys are punching at that particular time in their careers. Now, with reference to Wilfredo Gomez, when he did fight Carlos Zarate, that was his 6th title defense. That was Wilfredo's 6th title defense, and like I said, he's he's probably the best boxer at that time since Ruben Olivares. So, with that being said, he was a little bit more older than Salvador Sanchez as far as age, but the experience was just about even. As you guys know, a lot of these Mexican fighters, they turn pro early, and they're able to, get in a lot of fights. Kind of like we see with Canelo now. Canelo is like 27 or whatever he is. He's at least 6 years younger than GGG, but he has more fights in GGG because in Mexico they turn pro earlier. They don't have this. They don't quite have the amateur program that Cuba or Russia or even America has. So they have to kind of learn on the job. So that being said, as Sanchez and Gomez about to fight, keep in mind Wilfredo Gomez at that particular time is probably the most destructive force in boxing. The guy had knocked out, like, I believe it was, well, I forgot how many fighters it was, but he knocked out so many fighters. He had a ridiculous KO streak that, the same way we marvel at Triple G's KO streak is the same exact way we would marvel at the knockout streak of Wilfredo Gomez. But in this fight, he was the guy moving up in weight. A lot of times we talk about guys moving up in weight. He was the one moving up to 126 from 122, I believe. Let me make sure I'm correct in saying that. He moved up to 126 from 122 to fight Salvador Sanchez. Now, Salvador Sanchez, was the bigger guy. Salvador Sanchez was definitely the longer guy, the more lanky guy. When you watch these two in the ring, Salvador Sanchez, in comparison to Gomez, has kind of like that Tommy Hearnsville. Very skinny, wiry, strong. He'll keep you at the end of that jab, and he was able to do that pretty well against just about everybody he fought. So with that being said, if this fight would have happened in the social media age, this would have been, huge because both these guys undefeated, both these guys in their primes, both these guys delivering vicious knockout after vicious knockout after vicious knockout with fan-friendly styles, and like I said, they're fighting. They fight for the two biggest fan bases in boxing, Puerto Rico, Mexico. So with that being said, as far as coming into this fight, Wilfredo Gomez was 25 years old. This was going to be his 34th fight of his professional career, but he had the advantage of amateur experience because he did represent Puerto Rico in the Olympics. He had a 96-3 amateur record, and the guy was a seasoned fighter all around. At 122, moving up at 126 to take on the biggest and baddest man at 126 in a very young Salvador Sanchez. Salvador Sanchez, age 22, coming into that fight. This was going to be his 43rd professional fight against the most destructive puncher he had seen at this point in his career, and probably at any point in his career. So, Gomez, like I said, I talked about the KO streak earlier. Gomez had 32 straight knockouts coming into this fight with Salvador Sanchez. He's 32-0-1 coming into this fight. Gomez was actually a 2-1 betting favorite. So Sanchez, believe it or not, even though this is natural weight, you'd be led to believe that he would be the favorite in this fight. He wasn't actually. Gomez was on such a KO streak that he was a slight favorite in this fight. And yeah, man. And as far as Salvador Sanchez, he died very young in a tragic car accident, I believe it was. And this guy, to me, when we talk about the great featherweights, is easily top 5 to 6. Just based on the two guys he was able to beat before he even turned 24 years old, which was being he would go on in this fight to beat Gomez by knockout, and he also went on to beat a young, but still it was Azuma Nelson. Azuma Nelson went on to be a good champion himself. I mentioned Azuma Nelson. I mentioned that Sanchez passed away at age 23, so very young when he passed away. Now, as far as the dimensions for this fight, Gomez was the shorter guy, like I said. He was 5'5" with a 66.5-inch reach, which in comparison to Sanchez, Sanchez was coming in at 5'6" with a 68-inch reach. So Gomez, his whole plan of attack was he had to get on the inside and he had to get past the very long, very sharp, very precise jab of Salvador Sanchez. And if he could do that, if he could get past the jab, that this fight was his to win. So with that being said, before I get into how the fight played out and my overall breakdown of it, a couple of notes for this fight. Don King promoted this fight. Larry Holmes, the great heavyweight champion, commentated this fight. And it was at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. So just a couple quick tidbits there before I get into this fight. So, like I said, this fight was going to be the battle of the little giants. The guys at those smaller weight classes were the two best pound-for-pound talents in the sport. This kind of fight now is the kind of fight that would easily get a couple million views, whether it be on HBO or Showtime or PBC or whatever the case may be. It's one of those kind of fights, one of those once-in-a-generation type fights. And like I said, if you haven't watched this fight before, I highly advise you do. It's, like I said, in the rivalry of Puerto Rico versus Mexico, of all the fights I have seen, and keep in mind I still got quite a bit of Puerto Rico versus Mexico fights to watch, but this is the best fight in that series that I've seen, and it's probably one of the top 5 best fights I've ever watched. So go check it out if you haven't already. But another note that is that Puerto Rican boxing great and the youngest champion in boxing history, Wilfredo Benitez, was also in attendance for that fight. Now, leading up to the fight, as we're going into the fight, so Salvador Sanchez and Wilfredo Gomez, they both come into the ring. Wilfredo Gomez is coming out to salsa, merengue music of his Puerto Rican heritage. Salvador Sanchez is coming in to the ring with his mariachi music, and the mariachi band was on the side of the ring with the sombreros. So as they're in the ring and as we're getting ready for the introductions, we get a confusion of cornermen as the refs trying to call the cornermen to the ring. There's a confusion of who's supposed to come to the center of the ring and address themselves as the cornermen for each corner, and it delays the fight a little bit, delays the introductions a little bit. And what happens in the midst of that is you have the Puerto Rican music of Wilfredo Gomez and the salsa and the merengue on one side, and then you have the very loud, very vibrant, colorful mariachi music of Salvador Sanchez and his heritage and the Mexican heritage playing on the other side, and it becomes like this 2 to 3 minute just barrage of Hispanic, Latin American music, and it's like a battle of the bands ensues, and you hear Puerto Rican music on the side and Mexican music on the other side. So I found that interesting. Leading up to the fight, it was pretty funny. Then you have Don King in the middle of the boxing ring, just like smiling, just looking around. So it was quite the scene at Caesar's Palace leading up to this fight. So as the fight starts, we'll start with round 1. Round 1 was for Salvador Sanchez everything you could have wanted. I mentioned that Gomez was the shorter fighter in this fight. Definitely, you could argue he was a harder puncher, but he was a shorter guy. He was the guy that it was his job to work his way on the inside, and he's trying to do that. He's definitely trying to slip in and get under some shots, but the jab of Salvador Sanchez, he's just pecking him and pecking him and pecking him, and he's landing that jab at will. And for the first time in Wilfredo Gomez's career, really, he's disoriented, he's confused, and he doesn't necessarily know what to do. And eventually in that round, in that particular round, he gets knocked to the canvas. Salvador Sanchez knocks him to the canvas, hits him with a barrage of shots, and then eventually, you see him landing sharp punch after sharp punch after sharp punch. Whether long range, close range, he's just landing punch after punch after punch, and they're all sharp, and you're seeing what makes Salvador Sanchez an all-time great featherweight and an all-time great fighter. In that first round, he cuts the right eye of Wilfredo Gomez in the first round, and the first real test for Wilfredo Gomez has been brought to the table for him. And being a smaller guy moving up in weight, a lot of guys could fold in that situation. And we were going to see. We knew he was a talented fighter, but on this night, we were as boxing fans, we were going to get a look into the character of a Wilfredo Gomez, and that's ultimately what we got as the fight continued to go. So that round, I gave it 10. I gave that 10-8 Sal Sanchez. So at 10-8 for Sal Sanchez. In the second round, Wilfredo Gomez kind of gets his feet under him, his legs under him. He closes the distance in spurts, but Sanchez in that jab, it's just he still couldn't get past that jab, so he continues to get pecked with the jab and pecked with the jab, and his rhythm was thrown off. Sal Sanchez, with his jab and working off of that jab, was able to outwork Gomez in that second round, and the jab had been established very clearly in the first 2 rounds. When we talk about establishing a jab in boxing, I think the first 2 rounds of this fight are a great example of what establishing a jab looks like. So Sal Sanchez did a great job of that, being the bigger guy with the longer reach at his natural weight, really imposing himself on a guy that you don't really want to see on the inside in Gomez. So, the question adversity had been brought to the table for Wilfredo Gomez, and he had to really answer. You're already down 2 rounds to nothing. In the first round being a 10-8 round for Sal Sanchez to the knockdown. It was really, the onus was on him to really just stick to his game plan and just keep coming. So in the third round, he probably has the most success he's had at that point in the fight in comparison to the first 2 rounds. Gomez closes the distance, lands some sharp punches. What I would say about Gomez, the most impressive thing in those first 2 rounds is that, the first 3 rounds, I should say, is when you get pecked with the jab as much as he did in those first 2 rounds, you get hit with a straight right plenty of times. The knockdown that he did suffer in the first round was not from a long range straight right hand from Salvador Sanchez, but rather a very short, very sharp, very crisp punch that, and I believe it was, I'm going to say it was a right hook or a left, I don't know, it was a short right hand, I believe, that sent him to the canvas. And credit to him, he stayed with his game plan, which was to keep the pressure on Salvador Sanchez and use an efficient work rate. Was getting into some good exchanges. Round 3 of that fight, I gave it to it was a swing round, but I gave it to Gomez just because of his ability to cut distance, not get discouraged, and be a bit more of the ring general in that round. And yeah, that's what it was. So round 3 was a really good round. Now round 4, after Gomez responds very well, he's going back to his corner. He's probably saying, okay, this guy has hit me with his best shots. This guy has pecked me with his jab the first 2 rounds. This guy sent me to the canvas. I'm still here. I'm still coming forward. If you're Gomez, you're probably thinking, hey, I won that round. The fight's, the first round being a 10-8 round, but you've won 1 of the 3 rounds, so you're feeling really confident. And when you're a guy who's knocked out 30 plus opponents in a row, you're believing in your power that eventually you'll find that one shot and you'll break this guy down. And so the psyche of a Gomez has to be very high, and the confidence has to be very high going into round 4. And in round 4, let me tell you something. If you're someone who appreciates the nuances of boxing, range control, distance, how to slip punches, when to use a counter, then round 4 was a flat-out treat from Salvador Sanchez. The way he was able to change the rhythm of his jab, where he was throwing it from, and the counters he was landing, it was just an exceptional display of the sweet science in that round. So like I said, he changed rhythm constantly in that fight, whether it was circling him, slipping out of the corners when Gomez tried to cut him off, cut the ring off. He just did a good job of staying in the middle of the ring and just keeping that jab out there. There was 2 really good counter rights he landed while he was in the middle of the ring, and the kind of counter right hands he landed in those rounds were the kind of counter right hands you can only land if you have an understanding of distance and if you slip to the if you slip to the left, you come over the top of the right. He understood that very well, which is why I think he had those pound for pound skills. He had those all-time great skills. Salvador Sanchez being one of the best Mexican fighters ever. So lands in round 4. He lands 2 very flush counter right hands, and they're the kind of counters that if you're a Gomez, you just had your best round of the fight in round 3. Round 1 and 2, you're thinking you took his best shots, and you have a round like that. You know, it'd be very easy to get discouraged. And credit to him, he didn't get discouraged all night. It even looked like in that round that his punches had began to run out of steam, and because he did close distance very well in that round in spurts, and he did hit Sanchez with some good punches, but he wasn't able. It didn't appear that they had any effect on Sanchez in that particular round. It looked like that Gomez was a dead man walking, and he had every reason to get discouraged. Any normal fighter, any regular fighter would have got discouraged after that round, but this is not any regular fighter. This is Wilfredo Gomez talking about. And credit to him, man. He was in there, staying there with an all-time good like Sanchez, and just keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. So round 4, he gets dominated. He's on the receiving end of a great display of the sweet science by Salvador Sanchez. Now in round 5, Wilfredo Gomez, you know, when we talk about going for broke, from this point forward, he goes for broke. Like very few fighters today can go for broke. How very few fighters have ever went for broke. He has to go into a real deep place, and he's got to really find some extra fire, some extra motivation to get past this razor sharp jab, to get past this guy who really has a good understanding of where he's at in the ring and where he can land a lot of those punches at a sharp angle. So it was no easy task for Gomez to have success after round 4. So round 5, Gomez did something great. Now, we mentioned that Sanchez probably had a great round 4. In round 5, this is where I think Sanchez made a bit of a mistake, and this is where I think Gomez did a great job. You know, because he knows that he hasn't been able to get past the jab. He knows that he's been getting hit with counter rights as he's moving, whether he circles to his right or he circles to his left. So he made an adjustment at this point in the fight, and he says, you know what, I'm going to fight this dude while I'm in the corner. And he was able to smother Salvador Sanchez into these exchanges, and he in the process, was luring Salvador Sanchez into exchanges while in the corner, which for Gomez boded very well because Sanchez wasn't able to get full extension on his punches, and he was able to finally land some sharp punches, finally begin to inflict some of that power and hit him with some of those toma punches, as Puerto Ricans would say. But you know, that was just an incredible way to respond. And like I know we talk about in boxing, you know, a lot of the times it's not whether you win or lose, but it's how you fight and what kind of moments you leave the fans. And it was that round 5 by Wilfredo Gomez, like win or lose. If you're watching the fight at that point and you really understand boxing, in that round, after he had just been thoroughly dominated for 3 out of the 4 rounds, this is a guy who has never really been dominated at all in his career, had been the poster child for being a destructive force in boxing. For him to get dominated the way he was in the first quarter of that fight, and then dig deep and respond against a fighter like Salvador Sanchez, whether he won or lost that fight, you know, to me, that solidifies him as an all-time great, because not every fighter, regardless of their skill set, has the character to be in a fight where they're fighting a guy like Sanchez, who's bigger than them, who's fighting at their natural weight, who, like them, is undefeated, like them, you know, is just dominating the fight, and then, you know, he's able to make an adjustment, and when the opportunity came to take advantage within that adjustment, he did, and he responded like a champion. So I gave Gomez that round. At this point in the fight, that's round 5. I have I've given 3 rounds to Salvador Sanchez. I give him 2 to Gomez. Salvador gets an extra point though because of the knockdown. So really, in reality, he's up 4-2. But so round 6 comes around, and this is where Gomez really begins to, you know, make this fight an even one. And in round 6, you know, He neutralizes Sanchez with sharp punches. He begins to increase the volume, which is crazy because if you're watching the fight, his right eye looks like a baseball. And he's been getting pecked with the jab all night. He get hit with counter right, like I said earlier. And, you know, he's able to not just have success against Sanchez in little spurts, but he's able to dig real deep and increase his work rate and begin to inflict some of that Puerto Rican power on Salvador Sanchez. And, you know, within this round right here, we see the tide begin to turn. And if you're Gomez and you're someone who was cheering for Gomez, you got to feel confident because this guy is now, he's in the fight. And he's not some sort of dead man walking, and you can take solace in that, and he can take solace in that moving into round 7. So at this point in time, I have it, you know, it's just 7 rounds have passed, so I have it 4-3 for Sanchez. I have 4-3 for Sanchez, and then oh, this is round 6. No, this is round 6. So I have it 3-3 Sanchez, 3-3 for Sanchez, but it's 3-3. Oh, it's 3-3 tied up, but it's 1 more point for Sanchez because of the 10-8 round in the first round due to the knockdown. So now we go into round 7. That was round 6. So round 7, round 7 was a round of exchanges. That was a round where you had a lot of flurries, you had a lot of toe-to-toe action, and like I said, round 6 and round 7 of this fight is ultimately where I think Salvador Sanchez makes a huge mistake in getting into exchange with Wilfredo Gomez because. I mean, he was boxing beautifully the whole night. Gomez really had it. Wasn't able to consistently get past his jab. He stopped using his jab and he became, you know, kind of like a Mexican warrior for a couple rounds and lost mental focus. And this is what allowed Gomez back into the fight. And it was in this particular round, round 7, where Gomez cuts off the ring multiple times, and now he is backing up Salvador Sanchez, and he is the one winning not just one of the exchanges, but every single last one of the exchanges. Wilfredo Gomez was really putting it on Salvador Sanchez. So now he had backed Salvador Sanchez up, and the onus was on Sanchez. Could Sanchez dig deep, and could Sanchez respond to the adjustments that Gomez has made and get back to that mental discipline, getting back to his jab, staying in the center of the ring, because he had deviated from that within the last 2 rounds. And when you're fighting a guy like Gomez, who, yes, he's moving up in weight, yes, you are the bigger fighter, but he's not one of those guys that you want to touch you or really, you don't want to feel his power. Because, like I said, at that time, there was really nobody punching like Wilfredo Gomez at his weight class. So yeah, in that round, I gave it to Gomez. So at this point in the fight, I have it. You know, I have it. It's 4-3 for Gomez, but it's really like 4-4 because of the 10-8 round. So it's at this point in time, you know, the fight has evened out. You know, now it's really about who can find the other person's weakness, who can adjust to the other person's adjustment. Who can find the first chink in the armor? That we had gotten to that point in the fight because if you're Wilfredo Gomez, you had figured, you know, you had taken the best of Salvador Sanchez, and if you're Salvador Sanchez, you had figured that I'm about to take the best shot that I'm about to get from Wilfredo Gomez, and the fight at this point is very even, and then round 8 comes along, and in round 8. This is when I believe Salvador Sanchez realized that in the last 2 rounds he had lost focus. He begins to invest to the body, hits him with jabs upstairs, hooks to the body, jabs to the stomach. You know, and then eventually, like, you know, Wilfredo Gomez in round 7 was able to cut off the ring and lure Sanchez into exchanges. Now we have it the other way around. Sanchez in round 8 is now backing Gomez up, and there's another exchange. And within this exchange, like I said, Gomez's punches have been losing a little bit of steam on them. He had invested to the body, landed some really crisp body shots in round 8. And within one of the exchanges, Salvador Sanchez lands a devastating straight right hand for an 8th-round TKO over Wilfredo Gomez, and it was a hell of a straight right. You know, it was one of those real sharp straight punches. I guess Wilfredo didn't see coming, and that was all she wrote. And that was one of the greatest fights ever, because we had Gomez, the guy who had really come 22, a guy who had made title defenses, had knocked every had the fighter at 122, and he understood that the biggest fight for him was at 126 against a guy in Salvador Sanchez who, yes, he was young, but had had a lot of experience, and he wanted to test himself, and he had tested himself, and regardless if he got knocked out or not, the fact that he was able to take what Sanchez brought to him those first 2 rounds, and not just keep coming, but to keep coming and have loads of success throughout the course of the fight. To me, even in defeat, that validated Gomez as an all-time great, and as arguably maybe the greatest Puerto Rican fighter of all time. That might have validated his status amongst the Puerto Rican boxing greats as much as his 11 title defenses, honestly, because anybody who understands boxing, who knows the history of it, who knows you know, how great Salvador Sanchez was when he was fighting, to do what he did in the ring against a fighter of that caliber that night, you know, regardless of the loss, it says a lot about who he was as a fighter. And for Salvador Sanchez to be a guy that was fighting such a destructive puncher, to, you know, be in a position where the tide is turning and to be able to find that one chink in the armor and finally get that shot, take it full advantage of it, and put him to sleep, you know, or not put him to sleep. The TKO was a vicious TKO, but you know, it just says a lot about Sanchez. And for these guys, you know, it's one of those fights where, you know, you're never gonna see. It's rare that you get fights that great or even half that great in boxing. You know, it's probably, in my opinion, and obviously I have a lot more boxing to watch, but I think I can take a lot of solace in that being one of the top 15 to 20 best fights in boxing history. Just for what it means for the landscape of boxing, you know, the Mexico versus Puerto Rico boxing rivalry, which has taken on a life of its own. It's probably the definitive best fight in that series, in the opinion of many. The kind of pride that Wilfredo Gomez brings to Puerto Rican boxing fans, you know, that's not to be taken lightly. With the performance he had in this fight. For Salvador Sanchez, although he died tragically in a car accident at age 23, we had gotten a glimpse into what was about to be. You know, the guy could have went down as arguably, you know, the best featherweight ever. There are some people that do believe that maybe Salvador Sanchez could have been the best featherweight ever. And honestly, to have the amount of fights he had, you know, 45 fights. Yes, they're not all against great fighters, but still, to have 40 or 45 wins before even being, you know, 24 years old, you know, it says a lot about him. To beat a guy like the great Wilfredo Gomez, a guy who had knocked out 32 straight men going into his fight with Sanchez, you know, that's not to be taken lightly. And for him to beat him, you know, was a lot. Now, post-fight, Salvador Sanchez admitted that he definitely felt the punching power of Wilfredo Gomez, and you know, he felt the power of Wilfredo Gomez, but he said that he wasn't able. The only reason that he was able to stay in the fight was because that Wilfredo Gomez, while he was landing good, hard, effective punches, he wasn't able to land one of those on Salvador Sanchez's chin. So, you know, that was what he said in the post-fight. Larry Holmes, in the post-fight, who commentated this fight, said that it was he had never seen anything like this fight before in his years of boxing. So it's one of those fights that definitely lived up. It had everything you wanted. It had 2 undefeated fighters in their primes, hard punchers. It had, you know, nationalistic pride with Puerto Rican merengue bands and mariachi bands, you know, getting into a battle of the bands before the introduction started. It had a rambunctious crowd at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, and It's just one of those fights, man, where from beginning to end, there's really it's just really a treat to watch. So if you haven't watched this fight, it's definitely a must for any true boxing fan, and it's one of those you can watch over and over again because of all the little. If you're really someone who appreciates the little nuances of boxing and adjustments and foot placement and range control and just things of that nature, then this is a fight that you're going to love because those two had it all in that fight. They did it all. And for me, when I talk about the great Puerto Rican fighters, for me it's always, I would say Wilfredo Gomez has to be in your top three. A lot of Puerto Rican, especially the older Puerto Rican boxing fans, would say that Wilfredo Gomez is either number 1 or 2 behind Wilfred Benitez. I'd probably put him at number 2 behind Benitez. I think just what Benitez was able to do is being the youngest champion in history of boxing. That speaks for itself. But Gomez, they're interchangeable to me. You could go either one. Then you have the likes of Cotto and Felix Trinidad and guys of that nature. So, I mean, he established himself as an all-time great in that fight. Salvador Sanchez, it sucks that he died so young because he looked like he was on his way to becoming maybe a top, 3 featherweight of all time, maybe the best featherweight of all time, maybe even a top 25 fighter of all time. He had that much talent, and you see it. You can definitely see it in that fight. So, that's my review for this fight. Salvador Sanchez over with the 8th round TKO over Wilfredo Gomez, 1981 at Caesar's Palace. Definitely a classic. Yeah, man. Let me know what you guys thought about this review and any other fights you want to see me do reviews on. I do have a list of fights I'm going to be watching, so I have to. I'll tell you guys some of the fights I have to watch because I made a post about it on Facebook a couple weeks ago. I have to watch a lot of the Trinidad fights, like Trinidad versus De La Hoya, Trinidad versus Hopkins, Trinidad versus pretty much any one of the big Trinidad fights. A lot of people wanted to see me do reviews on those, and Mayweather Emmanuel Gus is another one I have to watch. A couple ones that I want to do personally for myself are Roman Gonzalez and Juan Francisco Estrada. And then I wanted to watch as well. I also wanted to go back and revisit the fight between Roy Jones Jr. and James Toney, and then James Toney and Michael Nunn. So these are just some of the fights that you will be seeing me do videos like this on the channel soon. Hopefully you guys enjoy this one, but comment any other ones you want to see down below, and I'll get to those when I get to them. So.
Excellence is my presence. Never tense, never hesitate. Even if it's real quick. My engine touch gives a girl you touch. In this world I clutch. Keep on toe, not toes. Used to call me Taco. Now you call me Taco. You in the danger zone, you shouldn't be alone.